Coverkillernation. Hi. Venom, Fallen Angels. Venom's one of these bands that's a highly influential act in our genre. Without Venom, there wouldn't be a lot of the thrash that's out there today. There wouldn't be bands like Behemoth, a lot of the crossover acts that really decided to infuse thrash, black metal, and death metal together. Venom has had that effect on a lot of individuals and a lot of bands that they have been cited as a principal influence for many different genres, really. They've been going at it since the early 1980s. In fact, you could really say the late 1970s. And it spawned two popular comebacks. However, this comeback, the one that's happened ever since 2003, has gotten a little old. It's gotten a lot of scrutiny, and rightfully so. They've released a couple of albums, and honestly, the first one in this particular series, Resurrection, was freaking awesome. And of course, the subsequent releases ever since then have kind of just gone downhill a little bit. The main reason is they seem very formulaic, and they also seem very droll and lacking inspiration. So what about Fallen Angels? Would Fallen Angels follow in the same vein, or will Fallen Angels revert back to Resurrection and actually be a pretty decent release? Well, Nation, I regret to inform you that this album is 15 tracks in length. So that right there should probably let you know where this review is going. This is an album where basically any sort of inspiration that Cronus and the boys got, they just recorded. That's exactly how it feels. It feels like anything that they, kind of dreamt up, they were just like, well, that's good enough. And that's good enough. Hey, that's good enough too. There are a couple of neat elements to this album. One thing is that metal has always been very guitar driven, and the bass has kind of been in the background to provide a lot of great, I would say, like backing or a lot of synchronicity with it, where you combine the bass and the guitar together, and it just creates a really great atmosphere, and that's what creates the heaviness. This is an album, and this is a band where, of course, the bass is a little bit more of a primary article here. It's the thing that actually will kind of count off the songs, or instead of hearing a guitar solo to start off a song, you're more often than not going to hear a bass solo. And that's, of course, just based around how the band is structured and operated and how it's been for quite some time, so it's nothing new. That's actually kind of neat, though, on this particular album, because it's almost like you're hearing the last, recordings of Cliff Burton or something like that. He's counting down these songs that Metallica's about to play or something like that, but not really, of course. Of course, with Venom, a little bit different. This is an album that is mired by just really kind of corny material. It's mired by material that, well, it should be B-sides, I guess. I mean, this is something that you'd almost expect from a B-sides album where, these are the songs that didn't make it to the rough cut of an album, because there's just not a lot to really be remembered on this album whatsoever. It's not a terrible album by any stretch of the imagination. This isn't like a Morbid Angel, Queens of Reich, Metallica and Lou Reed, anything like that. No, it's not quite like that. Mainly because this is an album where the material itself isn't really bad. It's not as though, it's terrible stuff. It's just that this is what we kind of grown used to. We've grown used to this with Venom. We've grown used to really substandard material, or stuff that just seems like the formula is being followed and Kronos is just following the money. I think the biggest gripe that I have about this album is how uninspired it feels. And that's something that just bothers me, not only as a music consumer, but also as a former musician myself, because I remember how long and how hard that my band and I used to work just on getting one song done, or just getting one riff done. The real particular, how particular you really have to be in order to get something perfect, especially if you are that kind of person. And it just seems like this is a band where, right now, there's just no care. There's no real straightforward desire. Subject material is all rehashed stuff. Really, it's just, there's no imagination to it, and there are very few moments on this album where I actually felt very engaged with it. It felt like a very long process. It felt like a very tedious, almost boring process. I mean, this was very good background music while I was doing other things, but aside from that, I didn't feel very connected to this album. And that connection is something that's extremely important. You kind of have to be connected to an album in order to really enjoy it, else what is there? So overall, Venom fans, if you're a classic fan of this band, you're probably going to enjoy this album simply because Venom has another release out. I'm not saying that you're that easy to please, I'm just saying that, well, if they're one of your favorite bands, then you gotta support them, even if it is total shit. For the casual listener, for the very curious onlooker, the person that maybe is young right now and has never heard Venom, and this is their first exposure to Venom, because for whatever reason they aren't going back to the past, or even the recent past, well, I think they'll almost be turned off by it. I think they'll listen to this album and think, well, why was this legendary? Why is this band considered to be breakthrough? Why was this band considered to be one of the most important members of the metal community in the early 1980s? And I don't think they'll get it. I don't think they'll understand it. I don't think that this album is a great representation of the Venom legacy. Though the Venom legacy has been mired by a lot of mediocre material, this one's, well, pretty low on that totem pole itself. Not the worst Venom album I've ever heard, but definitely not the best. It's getting close to the worst. At this point, I wonder why I even reviewed this album, mainly because it just seems like I'm being boring on this album review because the album was boring. So, I'm going to do you and myself a favor. I'm also just going to maybe give Venom a little piece of advice. The biggest problem Venom had on this new record is that it is 15 tracks, and that it is a very, very long album that's not filled with a lot of great material. So with this album review, I'm just going to sign off and say, buy this if you want. If you don't want to, then don't. I don't care either way. Just like Venom.